It's Dennis Raimondi here with the Coffee League, speaking about all things related to coffee. My guest today, Gurpreet Singh. He is from New York City. He's a manager at Irving Farm in Third Avenue. And I was in New York recently. I went to the New York Coffee Festival. Great, fascinating event. They needed a bigger venue. There were too many people in too small a space, I thought. But other than that, it was really enjoyable. And when I'm there, I visit a lot of cafes. And I went into Irving Farm at Third Avenue. And Irving Farm's a great roaster. They have a number of cafes in the New York area. And I usually stop at one or more of them while I'm in New York. And while there, I met Gurpreet, and he has a very interesting story. And I'll let him tell it today because I'm fascinated by the people I meet in the world of coffee and their backgrounds. Welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time to come on and talk to me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, we've had this discussion, but I want to share it with our listeners. Your background, you don't come. It wasn't like you were a guy working as a barista for a number of years and just sort of stayed in coffee. Your background was initially in business or studying business, and you had a different, I think, career track than where you're at right now. Is that right?
Yeah, to be totally honest, I remember even a year ago, literally, you can say last summer, I was asking people what a cold brew is versus an iced Americano. I had no idea what an Americano meant. I thought a macchiato had a lot of milk in it. I really had no education or idea on even where to start when it came to coffee. It only started as of August of last year, so August of 2017. My interest kind of grew, and here I am. I've been a barista. I've been someone who's worked back of house, front of house. I've worked for a number of different cafes across New York City, and as you've mentioned, I currently manage the Upper East Side Irving Farm. That's on 80th and 3rd Ave.
Well, what is your background? What was your educational background in?
So I actually I studied finance and math over at NYU Stern. Had a double major from there. Graduated in 15. Spent some time, a couple of years, working over at Axia, which is Credit Suisse's fund of funds group. Axia, started with that Credit Suisse group, Jim Vos and a number of other people, Patrick Adelsbach, and then they broke off and started what's now known as Axia, which is a $60 billion fund of fund vehicle that advises and manages a number of a large number of capital for a number of different clients. So I spent a little over a year there as an investment analyst. And before that, I was over at Cantor Fitzgerald doing CCRE, which is commercial origination on a number of large deals. So that's my background. And then, as I mentioned a year ago, it all kind of changed, and now my focus has been heavily on the coffee and the hospitality world.
Let's talk about that. How did it change? You're in this business world. You're on. You have the educational background. A lot of people are attracted to that world because there's the potential for significant financial gain. Some people like the work. Some people don't like the work. Some people that don't like it stay in it and complain about it, but work for the money that they're making. I think they call that golden handcuffs. What was it that made you decide to leave that world and into the world you're in now?
So I guess to give a little background, my family and I we're all permanent residences out in Huntington and Dix Hills, New York, which is Suffolk County, Long Island. When I was younger, I would always say to my parents, I was like, whatever it takes. I don't want to go to school for too long. I want to get out into the working world, and I want to make money. I didn't want to go to med school, or I didn't want to go get my PhD. I wanted to go study finance, go 4 years in, 4 years out, and go start chasing, whatever my future held. So when I started that path, everything felt great. Working at Morgan Stanley when I was a sophomore in college, working at Cantor Fitzgerald, working at a venture capital firm during one of my internships in college, working at Axia. It all felt right initially. And then as time went on, I just felt like I was stagnating in terms of who I was. I wasn't necessarily getting any further. And I went home and I said to my dad, I just gotten out of a breakup, and I was like, Dad, I just can't do this. I'm not happy. I was like, sooner or later, these 14-hour days are going to get to me, and it's either I quit or I get fired. I just can't take it anymore.
How did your dad react?
He honestly took it really well. He looked at me and he said, Gurpreet, to get to where I got, I needed those corporate hours. I needed to work that 9 to 5. And I did it for a number of years. I did it for over 30 years. And he looked at me and he said, but I didn't make my real money until I took my own risks. He said, until you take your own risks, you'll make your 100,000, you'll make your 200,000, you'll make your 300,000. But for you to increase your wealth or what you're worth or even your happiness by any scale, it's not going to come from working that corporate job. It's going to come from you taking your own risks. And so he looked at me and he said, I encourage you doing whatever it is you want to do. But he said to me, you can't quit. And I was like, why? And he was like, trust me, you're better off just getting fired. He's like, they'll give you severance, you'll walk away, and you'll be forced to figure out exactly what it is you want to do. So he was like, let me tell you something, just go out of the country for a little bit. So I followed his advice. I left the country for a little bit, came back, spoke to kind of a lot of my peers, realized
Let me ask you two questions. One is, what is your father's business?
My dad started in computer software. He was a software developer, graduated from Queens College, went to John Jay High School over in Flushing. And then over some time, after he got married, my mother and him started their own software consulting firm called TerraSoft Inc. And from there, they grew that business and got into residential real estate. Weirdly enough, when the market crashed, they kind of saw it as an opportunity to buy. Started doing a lot of fix and flips across the Northeast. Now they've gotten into development, and they also are day traders who spend a lot of time trading options. So they've kind of gotten into a lot of their own, little businesses. Right. But it was really those risks, as my dad always says, that kind of got them to where they are today. So when it came to me, the first thing was first. I kind of left that industry, and I said, what is it that makes me tick, so to speak?
Right. Now, when you left the country, did you take a vacation? Did you soul search? What happened during that period?
I just went to St. Martin for 2 weeks with some of my closest friends, and we were out there, and it was a lot of conversation in the middle of the ocean while we'd be floating around and just kind of saying, what is it that makes you happy? The buddies I was with were actually two of my buddies who are in med school still today. They're just finishing up med school. They just applied for the residencies, and they had such more very much some more traditional paths than I did. Their path was written out for them, and we would talk about the fact that regardless of whether they were happy or not, their next year was decided. They didn't have an option at this point. They were so baked into it that the light at the end of the tunnel was right there. For me, my counter argument would be that every day, every year, I can make a different decision. I'm not stuck in a 4-year or an 8-year educational program where I'm just like I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. One of those buddies is he's actually in dental school, so he's at Harvard Dental, and the other is graduating now from Albany Med. So those guys are still doing what they're doing, and they're happy, and they're on their path they decided years ago. But I, for myself, spent that time out there saying, what is it that really makes me tick, and looking for their support.
All right. So then you come back, and then what's the path to coffee?
Well, so it was actually weird. So when I came back, I first had lunch with one of my buddies who owns a clothing company called Kid Super, located out in Brooklyn. Kid Super is they're now huge. They've got 40,000 plus followers on Instagram. They do music videos for huge artists. They do album art. They do all sorts of creative things, and they also release their own clothing. The company, the founder, was an NYU grad, 2 years senior to me. Got lunch with me, and he said, "Hey, look, I heard you're looking for something new to do. You think it's possible to help us raise seed capital?" So I said, "Yeah, sure." So I got to working. I left Axia, and I said, I'm going to create a pitch deck, a DCF, get a cash flow analysis, get to an enterprise value, and look for some people who are willing to take this venture on. We found a couple of different growth equity ventures that made an offer to get into the company. And at that point, I said, okay, this is all great and jolly and dandy, but what is it I'm looking for myself now? After spending some time working for this company, I said, I kind of want a baby like this, similar to the one that Kid Super is, that I can help grow, and I can help see it succeed. So I got down to thinking, and I said, what is it that I love, and what is it that I'm passionate about, and what is it that I saw as, a limited overhead business that could really thrive and grow in the city. And I started looking around. I've lived in the Lower East Side since I was a freshman in college, over on Ludlow Street, and I noticed something interesting. I noticed that the majority of businesses here, they weren't paying rent hourly, but they were focused on making money hourly. They were either what I call daytime businesses or nighttime businesses. You're either a cafe or you're a bar. As a bar, you're making no money at Monday at 11 a.m. As a cafe, you're making no money on a Monday at 10 p.m. I said, why can't there exist a business that has numerous sources of revenue, that's not just focused on the single source of revenue, that can intimately change in the way that it feels from daytime to nighttime? I started talking to a lot of the guys in the coffee world. with the questions of why and if and why not. And I said to them, why hasn't this happened in the city yet, right? Why don't we see a place that goes from a morning cafe to a completely different name and a nighttime experience that functions as a lounge? And I wasn't able to get to an answer. So I started, working with a lot of the people I know. One of my close buddies, one of my closest friends from NYU, his family owns a number of restaurants across the U.S. And I got to thinking about, what would it take to do something of this on my own? And the first initial obvious step was to work in an industry that I felt passionate about. And I'm someone who over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I've gone to a number of cafes across the city. I can probably name a large majority of them. And I was like, I've never worked behind the bar myself. I'm always the guy on the other side looking at it. I don't really know how it operates in and out. So I was initially trained over at Ludlow Coffee Supply, which is a cafe owned by the guys who own Sweet Chicken.
Right, I was there, yeah.
Yeah, so Ludlow Coffee Supply opened about 2 years ago. I want to say March 2016. The guy who opened the cafe as their manager was one of my closest buddies, Ralph Pring, who I see on almost a daily basis. Ralph was the one who took me under his wing, and he said, look, if this is a dream of yours, then I'm more than happy to help push this dream forward. Mm-hmm. He trained me behind the bar, and he got me my first job working in the industry. I pretty quickly rose in stature, I suppose, at Ludlow Coffee Supply. I learned, the initial beginnings of latte art, and it's a phenomenal cafe. They roast their own bean over in Red Hook, Brooklyn, working with D'Amico Coffee. Someone by the name of Tommy helps roast their bean, who I've met a number of times. And their roast was actually done by Ralph, who was a GM there when they first opened. And so then from there, for me, it was the next step. About 4 months in, I said, I've learned everything there is to learn here. They sell a number of avocado toasts a day. I learned the recipe on the avocado toast. I learned everything there was behind the culture and the charisma. And I said, what's next for me? From there, I met someone by the name of Sharon. Sharon is actually the owner of 7 Grams Cafe. 7 Grams has 2 locations, one in Chelsea and one in West Soho. The one in West Soho opened about a year ago now, late last year. I became close friends with Sharon and became even closer friends with his regional manager. Started taking care of the store over in Chelsea. Became a shift lead, the key holder at that store. And then from there, I said, what's next? And I continued down this process where I was steamrolling into other cafes, trying to learn, and gain experience. And the next place I went was Blue Stripes Cafe, which is started by someone by the name of Oded. Oded was the guy who started Max Brenner's, if you know Max Brenner's. He's the guy who stole the logo with the bald head. Worked with him for a little bit to help him open his new cafe called Blue Stripes. And then from there, I said, I wanted something that was more of what my initial dream set out to be, something with a full eats menu, something that could provide
Let me stop you there for a second and ask a question. Which aspect of the business were you enjoying most? Barista, roasting, the financial business end of it, expansion. What was really grabbing your interest at that time?
That's a great question. So to answer that question, we'll go into like a little bit of what 7 Grams does.
Okay.
So what 7 Grams does to differentiate itself from Ludlow, which was step 1 to step 2, is 7 Grams bakes all their pastries in house. Ludlow Coffee Supply, they buy most of their pastries wholesale. So what intrigued me the most was, as I mentioned earlier, the numerous sources of revenue, right? Where how can you step past just coffee and create an experience for everyone to enjoy? So 7 Grams does that by creating barricas in-house, creating canellis in-house. Their chocolate chip cookies are phenomenal. Their mini brownies are amazing. And these are all baked in-house by their head chef, David, who's a phenomenal baker. So that was what was intriguing me, was how do you move past just coffee itself, past just the drip coffee, and create an experience for someone to enjoy. So when I went to Blue Stripes, they served a lot of these cacao puree bowls, right? They were able to connect chocolate and coffee. It was the Max Brenner's model that met coffee, and it was so intriguing. So from there, I said, I want to go somewhere that has even more of an emphasis on the dining, on the food, and that's how I met Irving Farm. Irving Farm is a cafe in New York City with 8 locations going on 10. They used to have 9, one of which is being renovated. They have a huge we used to have a huge commissary kitchen, a production kitchen that created a number of sauces that were then pushed out to all our locations. The food is given a lot of emphasis at Irving Farm. We have a full kitchen at each of our locations. And the menu changes regularly, seasonally. We have a head chef, Alejandro Tres, who's very, very talented, has experience at a 3 Michelin-starred restaurant. Before him, our head chef before him, who ran culinary operations.
What are your hours there?
I currently work about 40 to 50 hours a week at
No,
Irving
but
Farm.
what are the hours of the cafe?
Oh, of the cafe. So the cafe operates from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. usually. On weekends, we open at 8. On weekdays, we open at 7. The kitchen usually at most locations closes by 7, but we serve our menu all day. Our line cooks are trained diligently, right. And our menu is phenomenal. Something we focused on time and time again is making that menu more appealing to the customer, making it something that is more cost efficient, that requires less prep work. We operate the way Irving Farm operates is we are green when it comes to coffee. We love coffee, and the bread and butter of our business is the roasting of the business. Right. We have a number of different roasts we offer. From all over the world. We are green bean distributors ourselves. We have a number of farms that we're directly connected with where we go and source our beans. And we've had these relationships for years. And those relationships are the bread and butter of our business. But that doesn't take away from the fact that we do have this second source of revenue, which is our culinary operations. And that's what intrigued me so much about Irving. And now I've been working with Irving since March or April of this year. When I came into Irving, it was so intriguing to me to find a cafe that had numerous locations that wasn't just functioning on what I earlier described as a single source of revenue. They had their bread and butter, they had their coffee, they had their wholesale business, but they also additionally brought on culinary operations. We have a phenomenal sous chef, phenomenal head chef, who handle the operations at all 8 to 10 locations.
So let me ask you one other question as we're getting into this. You obviously have a passion for the coffee industry and what's going on, and have a vision of what it is, what it could be. Coffee itself, is that something that are you a lover of coffee? Do you consume coffee? Do you enjoy it? Do you have reflections and observations on the culture that surrounds coffee?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, like you mentioned before we even began the interview, the coffee culture internationally is very, very appealing to me. In Japan, there's this huge culture around drip coffee that doesn't exist here. That's very intriguing to me. I personally am someone who enjoys an espresso-based drink significantly more. I enjoy a chocolatey espresso that you're able to cut through very well with milk. That's my preference on what I drink. But I also I prefer my drips to be over ice. It brings out the flavor. The flavor tones to me come out a lot more on drip when they're a little colder. I enjoy cupping. I love the smells of different coffee. Right. I drink coffee on a regular basis, but I would not say I'm someone who's an avid drinker of coffee. I my entire life have said to myself that I don't want to become dependent on anything. So even this morning, I wanted a coffee, but I said to myself, I don't really have a need for it today. I can get by the day without having my cup of coffee. Right. So I'm not someone who's drinking 3 cups of coffee a day. On the other hand, I'm drinking maybe 3 to 4 espresso-based drinks a week. But I do love the taste of coffee more than anything else. And for myself, obviously, given my background, coffee to me is just an intriguing space when it comes to business and the opportunities it provides when it comes to the duality of businesses. But so to get to where I ended up, I've obviously been working with Irving for quite some time now. I was initially at their Midtown location on 50th Street, and then they moved me up to manage the one on the Upper East Side on 3rd Ave, and now I've been there for a few months, which has been a phenomenal experience. The company is so large and has so many moving pieces that you're constantly learning. And it's exactly what I was looking for and what I wanted when I initially said, the duality in terms of revenue streams, having a place where coffee is the bread and butter, but it extends far beyond that.
And then where do you see yourself in 5 years? What would you like? Would you like to develop your own company, your own business? Would you like to stay in one aspect of it, or be multifaceted in terms of where you are in regard to the industry?
Yeah, I would say the timeline looks a lot shorter than 5 years. I'm someone who even over the past year I've been working with the brokers over at Cushman and Wakefield to kind of find a space that our team itself falls in love with. The team I'm working with is my family and another family that as I mentioned earlier owns a number of restaurants across the U.S. And we've been looking for kind of growing our concept. What we've been thinking of doing for ever since I started in the industry is, a cafe that can operate as a nighttime lounge. And we've been working to create the logo. We've been working to lock down a lease, and we hope to get there as soon as we can. That's been the goal since day one of entering the industry. And so 5 years down the line, we would hope to have a hospitality group that has a number of these concepts
Right.
that focus on the duality of revenue. That's something that New York City doesn't really bring to light too much, but it's necessary, especially with rents raising the way they are.
Right.
Finding even rents that are 130 a square foot now in the city is near impossible.
Right. I just, by the way, I just talked to a restaurateur from Brooklyn, New York, and his rents went up to the point where he just stopped his operation there, moved to Des Moines, Iowa, paid about 1/10 of what he was paying there, and he's making money hand over fist and expanding. So there's a lot. And actually, one of the things I was going to ask you is, would you focus on the New York area? Because I do a lot of traveling now, going to cafes, going to different cities all over. And the New York market is never saturated because it's such a big market, but there's so much there. But there's so much of the country, the United States, that is underserved in terms of specialty coffee. And there's, I think, tremendous opportunities in those areas. So would you focus on the New York area? Is it something you think nationwide?
I think our initial focus is the New York area. I truly believe that an understanding of a submarket is very, very valuable, especially in New York City. What I've noticed, at least living here so long for the past 25 years, is that New York City is not a place for franchises, right? Franchises will try to come in and they drop a location here, they drop a location there, they drop a location there. New York City is made for the hospitality groups, the guys like Mario Batali and the guys like the Tao Group, who go to specific submarkets and they say, what exactly is needed here? Like Danny Meyer, someone who goes out to Williamsburg, he goes to the waterfront, and he says, Taco Cena could be phenomenal here. A quick taco stand would do so well in this corner. Meanwhile, a dining Italian restaurant is the perfect thing for the West Side, right? And just truly understanding the submarkets, I think, is so important in New York City. It's something that so many people don't give importance to. They go, okay, let's just take the exact same concept and plop it on the Upper West Side as the Lower East Side. And the thing is, the Lower East Side market is not the same as the Upper West Side. People there are looking for a completely different coffee experience even. They're looking for a lot more love in the Lower East Side and a lot more of a fast pace on the Upper West Side. There are these differences that I think are often ignored. And so for that reason, I think New York City being a space that I know so well, I initially would want to use some of that knowledge and do well here before going out and, say, going to LA or even the Midwest.
Interesting. Well, I have no doubt that you're going to be extremely confident because I see in you a passion for coffee, but also a great business sense. And a lot of times, like in any industry, in the culinary arts, and I'll put coffee in that category now, the people that are sometimes in it are very artistic, and they don't have that business sense. You seem to have that artistic passion, but also the business sense that to go along with it. And I think that's a very good combination in coffee now. And it's phenomenal what's taking place now. People may listen to this podcast in the future. It's 2018. I think we just November 1st that we're taping this. And so there's an explosion of growth in specialty coffee. And I've observed it both in the U.S. and in Europe. And I'm in touch with a number of people in Asia. And there's a phenomenal growth going on there. Yeah, I think you're onto something. I hope we can get you back on the show in a year or so and see where you're at in terms of your vision and what you're headed toward. Any final words that you'd like to share with our listeners?
And then just thank you so much for having me. And I really do think, as you've mentioned, coffee culture has grown so vastly here. As you mentioned before, the New York Coffee Festival has gotten huge. You see a number of different roasters from Brooklyn to Staten Island to Queens to New York City that everyone who's in this scene is so passionate about it. And that's what's so beautiful is that there's no one who's sitting in coffee who's just bored and not enjoying it. You wouldn't be here if that was who you are. Everyone who's in this submarket, call it, is so passionate about what it has to offer and how you can combine it with any other thing. To just touch on this for a little bit, if you were at the New York City Coffee Festival this year, there were a number of cafes and coffee roasters that were even offering soft serve, right? It
Right.
wasn't just coffee. It was what can I combine? What can I make work with
Right.
coffee to enhance your experience?
Yep. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And you mentioned before the where they combined coffee and chocolate. Which cafe was that?
I believe it was Stumptown who had the soft serve, or
Right.
it was someone large who had the soft serve who was offering that. Donna Chai was also offering a number
Mhm.
of different items, but people have gotten it's no longer just the beverage; it's a lot more
Right.
of what's the entire experience that we
Right.
can offer you.
Right. Yeah. No. I saw you seen it with CBD oil and
Yeah,
everything
CBD
else
oil's
infused.
been taken
Yeah.
off. I was just at a 4 course dinner actually. That was every course was infused with CBD oil, and that's even that's this other whole
Whole other
growing
world.
world. It's
Great.
yeah.
Well, Gurpreet, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on. Third Avenue, Irving Farm in New York City. Stop in and say hello. And great cafe. And I wish you continued success. And as I said before, in 6 months, a year from now, as things progress, let's have you back on the show and people can follow your career. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd
All
love
right.
to be back on.
All the best. Take care.
All right. Thank you.